Corporate culture can be quite a tricky one to define because it is a bit of a woolly concept, but it's really about the general way that things are done in an organisation. So do people work really collaboratively, sharing ideas all the time, or does everyone get on with their work independently? Is creativity and doing things a bit differently encouraged, or is everyone expected to just conform? Is risk-taking encouraged, or are people more risk-averse? So these are the sorts of questions that would define a corporate culture. But whatever these values and standards might be, in strong cultures, they're totally clear and subscribed to by all of the employees in the organisation. Staff will be more likely to take initiative, show commitment to the company, which can create more unity and actually help with motivation then as well. In weak cultures, there'll be much less clarity on these values. Staff will probably feel less trusted, and as a result there could be more of a need to monitor and micromanage rather than allowing workers to be empowered in what they're doing. A slightly more subtle way to try and classify company cultures was put together by a professor called Charles Handy, who identified 4 different types of culture. In power cultures, there are just a few or even just one person at the centre of the organisation who's really dominating all of that decision making. So everything flows through them and there are very little rules or procedures to keep them in check. This can make decision making really fast, but the quality of the decision making is really going to be dependent on the skills and the insight of those that are at the centre. In role cultures, there are much more clearly delegated lines of authority. Rules and procedures are key, which means decision making is likely to be more thorough and informed, but it can be a problem in very dynamic markets because that process can take quite a long time. And there's probably a bit of a link here to taller organisational structures with lots of levels of hierarchy where these role cultures might come into play a bit more. In task cultures, teams are formed to fulfil specific targets with power shared evenly between those team members. So that would be a bit more likely in a matrix structure of organisation and can be quite useful in fast changing markets where project teams can be set up and then collapsed as they're needed in response to changing conditions. Do need to be really mindful with this type of culture that teams are all pulling in the same direction with the objectives of the organisation front and centre. And finally, in person cultures, there's much more emphasis on the individual, their skills and their expertise. Power's shared, which can lead to more creativity and empowerment, but it can result in the needs of the individual being put ahead of the needs of the organisation. These cultures will be more associated with perhaps democratic or possibly even more laissez-faire leadership styles. Corporate culture does tend to be formed over a number of years and can be influenced by a huge range of different factors. Companies like Facebook, where the founder has built up the business and still remains in a leadership role, are much more likely to have power cultures that are centred around that founder. Maybe creative industries like software development, you'd expect to form person cultures because of the type of business it is, whereas role cultures might be more likely in industries like accounting or legal practices, where following rules and that attention to detail is a bit more important. Task cultures might be more likely in larger and more complex businesses which are undertaking different projects all the time. And finally, you might ask, how does a business view their staff? As an asset or as a cost? Do they want to take a harder or softer approach to HR management? And softer approaches would probably lean more towards person cultures, whereas harder approaches might be more likely to adopt power or role cultures instead. Corporate cultures do tend to be really deeply embedded within organisations, and as we said, tend to build up over a number of years or even decades, which makes them a really difficult thing to try and change. And that's often one of the biggest challenges for a new leader coming in, trying to impose their new ideas on culture. It's human nature to be resistant to change, and staff are likely to be suspicious of wholesale changes to the way they've done things over a long period of time. And so in order to overcome this, one suggestion might be to be really clear in communicating the reasons for and the benefits of the changes that are being made. Staff would generally want to feel listened to and that their views have been taken on board, even if a leader decides to go in a different direction.